So, very last recording, and I left off reading this part. So we see Christopher John's asking about Pop and Mr. Morrison. They didn't have to fight the old men. They didn't have to use the guns. So they're asking to see what's happening to everybody. So let's keep going for a little bit. Thank the Lord, no, said Mama. They didn't. The fire come up, said Stacy, and Mr. Morrison come and got me, and then the men come down here to fight the fire, and nobody had to fight nobody. Mr. Morrison come get you alone? I asked, puzzled. Where was Papa? Stacy again looked at Mama, and for a moment they both were silent. Then Stacy said, "Y'all know who couldn't make that slope with that bad leg of his." Okay, so we see more effects of the fire. So remember that at this point, they were Stacy was by the Avery house trying to see what was gonna happen to TJ. Then Cassie went to go get Mr. Morrison and Papa. So they're basically saying that Mr. Morrison came to get Stacy alone, and everyone went to go fight the fire. Okay, so then let's keep going. I looked at him suspiciously. I had seen Papa move on that leg. He could have made the slope if he wanted to. All right now, Mama said, rising. It's been a long, tiring night, and it's time you were all in bed. I reached for her arm. Mama, how bad is it really? I mean, is there enough cotton to pay the taxes? Mama looked at me oddly. Since when did you start worrying about taxes? I shrugged, then leaned closer toward her, waiting an answer, yet afraid to hear it. The taxes will get paid, don't you worry, was all the answer she gave. Now let's get to bed. But I want to wait for Papa and Mr. Morrison, I protested. Protested the little man. Me too, yawned Christopher John. Inside. All of us went in but Stacy, and Mama did not make him. But as soon as she had disappeared into the boys' room to make sure little man and Christopher John got to bed, I returned to the porch and sat beside him. I thought you went to bed, he said. I want to know what happened over there. I told you, Mr. Granger. I come and got Papa and Mr. Morrison like you asked. I reminded him. Now I want to know everything that happened after I left. Stacy sighed and rubbed his left temple absently, as if his head were hurting. Ain't much happened, except Mr. Jameson tried talking to the men some more, and after a bit, they pushed him out of the way and stuffed TJ into one of their cars. But Mr. Jameson, he jumped into his car and lit out ahead of them, and drove up to Mr. Granger's and swung his car smack across the road so couldn't nobody get past him. Then he starts laying on his horn. You go over there? He nodded. By the time I got across the field to where I could hear what was going on, Mr. Granger was standing on his porch, and Mr. Jameson was telling him that the sheriff or nobody else was about to stop hanging on that flimsy message he'd sent up to the Averys. But Mr. Granger, he just stood there on his porch looking sleepy and bored, and finally he told the sheriff, Hank, you take care of this. That's what folks elected you for. Then Caleb Wallace, he leaps out of his car and tries to grab Mr. Jameson's keys, but Mr. Jameson threw them keys right into Mr. Granger's flower bed, and couldn't nobody find them. So Melvin and R.W. come up and pushed Mr. Jameson's car off the road. Then them cars was about to take off again when Mr. Granger comes running off the porch, hollering like he's lost his mind. There's smoke coming from my forest yonder, he yells. Dry as that timber is, a fire catch a hold, it won't stop burning for a week. Give that boy to wade like he wants, and get on up there. And folks started running all over the place for shovels and things, and then all of them cut back down the road to the Averys and through the woods over to our place. Okay, so now we know the effects of the fire means they went from trying to punish TJ to they had to head over there to try to put out the fire. And that's when Mr. Morrison got you? Stacy nodded. He found me when I followed the men back up to the woods. I sat very still, listening to the soft sounds of the early morning, my eyes on the field. There was something which I still did not understand. Stacy nodded toward the road. Here come Papa and Mr. Morrison. They were walking with slow, exhausted steps toward the drive. The two of us ran down the lawn, but before we reached the road, a car approached and stopped directly behind them. Mr. Jameson was driving. Stacy and I stood curiously on the lawn, far enough away not to be noticed, but close enough to hear. David, I thought you should know, said Mr. Jameson. I just come from Strawberry to see the Averys. How bad is it? Mr. Jameson stared straight at the road. Jim Lee Barnett, he died at 4 o'clock this morning. Papa hit the roof of the car hard with his clenched fist and turned toward the field, his head bowed. For a long, long minute, none of the men spoke. Then Mr. Morrison said softly, "The boy, how is he?" Doc craned and said he's got a couple of broken ribs and his jaw's broken, but he'll be all right, for now. I'm going to his folks to tell them and to take them to town. Just thought I'd tell you first. Papa said, "I'll go with them." Mr. Jameson pulled off his hat and ran his fingers through his hair, damp against his forehead. Then squinting, he looked over his shoulder at the field. "Folks thinking," he said slowly, as if he did not want to say what he was about to say, "folks thinking that lightning struck that fence of yours and started the fire." He pulled at his ear. "It's better, I think, that you stay clear of this whole thing now, David, and don't give anybody cause to think about you at all, except that you got what was coming to you by losing a quarter of your cotton." There was a cautious silence as he gazed up at Papa and Mr. Morrison, their faces set in grim, tired lines. Or somebody might just get to wondering about that fire. "Stacy," I whispered, "what's he talking about?" "Hush, Cassie," Stacy said, his eyes intent on the men. "But I want to know." Stacy looked around at me sharply, his face drawn, his eyes anxious, and without even a murmur from him, I suddenly did know. I knew why Mr. Morrison had come for him alone, why Mr. Jameson was afraid for Papa to go into town, why Papa had found a way, as Mama had asked, to make Mr. Granger stop the hanging. He started the fire. And it came to me that this was one of those known and unknown things, some things never to be spoken, not even to each other. I glanced at Stacy, and he saw in my eyes that I knew and understood the meaning of what I knew, and he said simply, "Mr. Jameson's going now." Mr. Jameson turned around in the driveway and headed back toward the Averys. Papa and Mr. Morrison watched him leave. Then Mr. Morrison walked silently up the drive to do the morning chores, and Papa, noticing us for the first time, stared down at us, his eyes bloodshot and unsmiling. "I thought y'all would have been in bed by now," he said. "Papa," Stacy whispered hoarsely, "what's going to happen to TJ now?" Papa looked out at the climbing sun, a round red shadow behind the smoggish heat. He didn't answer immediately, and it seemed as if he were debating whether or not he should. Finally, very slowly, he looked down, first at me, then at Stacy. He said quietly, "He's in jail right now." And what then?" asked Stacy. Papa studied us. "He could possibly go on the chain gang." "Papa, could he die?" asked Stacy, hardly breathing. "Son." "Papa, could he?" Papa put a strong hand on each of us and watched closely. "I ain't never lied to y'all. Y'all know that." "Yes, sir." He waited, his eyes on us. "Well, I wish I could lie to y'all now." "No, oh no, Papa," I cried. "They wouldn't do that to old TJ. He can talk his way out of just about anything. Besides, he ain't done nothing bad. It was them Simses. Tell him that." Stacy, shaking his head, backed away silent, not wanting to believe, but believing still. His eyes filled with heavy tears. Then he turned and fled down the lawn and across the road into the shelter of the forest. Papa stared after him, holding me tightly to him. "Oh, Papa, does it have to be?" Papa tilted my chin and gazed softly down at me. "All I can say, Cassie girl, is that it shouldn't be." Then, glancing back toward the forest, he took my hand and led me to the house. Mama was waiting for us as we climbed the steps, her face wan and strained. Little Man and Christopher John were already in bed, and after Mama had felt my forehead and asked if I was all right, she sent me to bed too. Big Ma had already gone to the Averys, and I climbed into bed alone. A few minutes later, both Mama and Papa came to tuck me in, talking softly in fragile, gentle voices that seemed about to break. Their presence softened the hurt, and I did not cry. But after they had left, and I saw Papa through the open window disappear into the forest after Stacy, the tears began to run fast and heavy down my cheeks. In the afternoon, when I awakened, or tomorrow or the next day, the boys and I would still be free to run the red road, to wander through the old forest and sprawl lazily on the banks of the pond. Come October, we would trudge to school as always, barefooted and grumbling, fighting the dust and the mud and the Jefferson Davis school bus. But TJ never would again. I had never liked TJ, but he had always been there, a part of me, a part of my life, just like the mud and the rain, and I had thought that he always would be. Yet the mud and the rain and the dust would all pass. I knew and understood that. What had happened to TJ in the night, I did not understand, but I knew that it would not pass, and I cried for those things which had happened in the night and would not pass. I cried for TJ and the land. Alright, so that's the end. Very powerful ending. I did want to take a moment to highlight a few things that were mentioned that I didn't stop for because we were in the middle of reading. But we have part of our answer. So we see who started the fire and what are the effects. Okay, so here we have where Cassie realizes who started a fire, and we realize that her papa's the one that started the fire. You should be asking yourself, like, why does he start the fire, right? It's kind of answered in the sentence if you read back. Papa had found a way, as Mama had asked to make Mr. Granger stop the hanging. He had started the fire. Okay, so that's a very important effect. Okay. So, there's plenty to choose from. Choose whichever quote you would like. I think I will choose this one from page 61. Okay, 61. So this means, so basically we know the truth then. We know that people all think who started the fire. And the answer is the lightning. People think lightning started the fire, but in reality we find out it was Papa who did it. This shows that. And there's different ways of answering this, but I would stick to, like, why does Papa start the fire? Since we know he's a very reasonable man. So why does he start the fire? Well, we know it's basically a huge distraction to really halt the night of violence that was occurring. So anything like that would work. Okay, so we're all done with our reading. I really encourage you guys to show up to our 12:30 discussion because a lot of heavy things happened. And I know that for me personally, like when a lot of things affected me emotionally, I like to be able to like talk it out with somebody else. So it's going to be a perfect time to talk it out with not only me, but other classmates. So hopefully we will see you there during our 12:30 discussion. But you should feel proud of yourselves for accomplishing reading Roll of Thunder, Hear My Cry, because we are officially done. So good job.